spoke about things that we could be doing with our kids, I could see the light bulb go on and parents start to nod like, you know, I always had a suspicion that that it would work like this, but I never had the courage to try it. So I kind of felt like I was more introducing people to an established philosophy than I was introducing them to something new that was mine. That resonate with me? Oh, I'm not sure if you can. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you there? Oh, good. Oh, good. Well, you froze, so I didn't. You were, yeah. Um, I think there are several things that resonated with me, and we could talk hours and hours about this topic. But in terms of parenting, it was this notion that everything happens within a social context. So when our kids are born, they're born into a family that is about relationships, but they don't know anything about them. So they have to learn everything about relationships based on the one they established with their parents. And that relationship becomes the blueprint for them as they move out into a bigger world. So it wasn't just that I was going to be in a relationship with a child, it was that this child was then going to translate everything that was happening and extend that out into the world. I love that notion. It speaks to me in a really deep way. The second was that children want to be independent, that there's a yearning deep inside of all of us to master our environment. And right, and that kids don't need to be talked into pursuing independence, but they need opportunities to develop and master self skills, social skills, and life skills. And as their parents, we have a chance to create environments in which they have 18 years in which to practice becoming independent and our ability to support them. I loved the idea that if you introduce children to a relationship that was built on dignity and respect, that they would not only give it to other people, but they would demand it from other people, which meant that as my children spent more and more time outside of the home, they would be much more savvy in terms of gravitating towards people who also embodied those qualities and would distance themselves from people who did not. So, in other words, they would be able to negotiate and navigate relationships with their peers in a much more thoughtful and savvy way. Yes, absolutely. So, one of the ideas that I took from Adler and kind of tweaked a little bit was this idea about feeding the weed. As parents, we tend to focus on all the things our kids do that drive us nutty. And when I work with parents, I say, just write your list out of all the things your kids do that make you want to pull your hair out. And it's a sizable list. And we tend to focus all of our attention on those pesky behaviors. And we go to the store, the bookstores, and get online and read blogs to learn what strategies we can use to minimize those pesky behaviors. And they include timeouts and counting and punishing and bribing and consequencing. But what happens is we end up feeding those weeds, and those pesky behaviors get more embedded in our kids. They tend to grow, they tend to flourish. And nagging, reminding, and lecturing are at the top of the list in terms of parenting strategies. So I knew that I was going to make the problem worse if I depended on all of those strategies. So I spent a lot of time thinking about, well, if not that, then what? How am I going to raise kids who are cooperative, respectful, contributing, capable, compassionate, flexible, resilient people if I can't just wag my finger at them and tell them that that's who they should be? And so I spent a lot of years thinking about all the ways that a parent could accomplish that. Yeah. Yes. 5 out of 5 are all high functioning, they're out on their own, they're in college or have graduated from college. So, yeah, the it's worked fairly well for us. Yeah, 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 everything. Yeah. So this came out at the same time that there was all the new literature about the dangers of micromanaging and helicopter parenting and hovering. And but before the trend hit, I had this idea that instead I do, I guess. It's a very large golden retriever. So let me see if I can go tend to him real quickly. Okay, thanks. Rock, what is it, bud? You don't usually don't bark. All right, I'm coming, David. I'm coming. I'm coming. It's not actually my dog. I'm staying with friends right now. So, yeah, yeah. So I'm not. That was unexpected, but I think he's all right. And I left the door open, so I think he'll be fine. So the duct tape reference over the parents' mouths. So the book kind of comes out as we're recognizing that the micromanaging and hovering is not raising kids the way we would hoped. And what I had always imagined for myself as a parent is that instead of standing in front of my kids and saying, listen, I'm going to do everything I can to make your life enjoyable. I'm going to solve your problems for you and pick out your clothes and wake you up and cook your favorite breakfast and pack your lunches and make sure that you're not frustrated. It didn't seem like a very exciting life for a kid. So instead of standing in front of them, I would take one step to the right and a half a step back. And my children could actually see then the landscape of the world that we were asking them to learn to navigate. I would be very close, I could still be engaged with them, but I wouldn't be controlling every aspect of their life. But I also couldn't be whispering in their ear, are you sure you don't want to wear the longer pants today? Are you sure you want to pour that much milk in the glass? Are you sure you've remembered your homework? So, for me, as a person who has a tendency to want to boss the entire world, I needed to use something to help me keep quiet. And I went to duct tape. I literally pulled a roll of duct tape out one week and I challenged myself to keep my mouth shut and watch how capable my kids could be if I let them. And because I can't be trusted, I couldn't keep my mouth shut without the duct tape. So I started pulling off pieces and putting them on the kitchen counter. And as my mouth would start to open, I would grab a piece of tape and put it over my mouth. And I learned amazing things after 5 days of keeping quiet about my kids that completely changed our lives. So the title of the book and that exercise are kind of the introduction to parents on getting good information, factual information about their kids and their abilities instead of relying on their assumptions about what their kids may or may not be able to do. Yeah. I think parents are looking for an approach to parenting that offers them some foundational concepts, but allows room for them to incorporate their own values, their own perspectives, their own styles, and their own rhythms. And I think that's what this work has allowed parents to do, is combine those things together. And when that happens, I think their confidence increases. And when their confidence increases, they make more thoughtful parenting decisions. And then that benefits the entire family. So it's a little bit of a snowballing effect that I think we've certainly experienced in the work I've done over the last 20 years. Yeah. I think of myself as an advocate for the kids, and my job is to help parents understand how they're mucking things up at home. Because the kids really have just a few goals. They want to stay connected to their parents, they want to learn how to master their own world, and they want to be part of a successful community of people. They're curious and they're engaged and they're great problem solvers, and we have to create an environment where all of that can be fostered. So, yeah, the parents get a I introduce a new perspective to them on perhaps the problems in the family are because of you and not the kids. And if that's true, the good news is you're in a powerful position to make dramatic change very quickly to the extent that you're willing to change what you do. And then that becomes the journey we take together. Yes, absolutely. I think it's a culture that likes to blame the kids, and you get a lot of talk on the playground. Oh, you won't believe what my 5-year-old did, my 7-year-old did. And that's the reason that we're so stressed. And it seems absurd to me that as a community of adults, we're pointing the fingers at little children as if a 5-year-old can really bring down an entire family. Like, it's just not been my experience. Is that a 5-year-old can actually do that without a lot of help from their parent. So and I think sometimes it's initially it can be hard for a parent to say, "Wait a minute, I'm the problem." But there's such liberation in the idea that, well, if I'm the problem, it means I can change it quickly and I can change it for the long haul. I don't have to keep using my energy and my resources trying to manhandle this little child who's working against me. If I take all those resources and energy back and work on myself, that's where the impact is. So I think it's just helping parents recognize it might seem like a really difficult thing to do, but it can be a completely liberating and exciting new way of parenting. Yeah. Yeah. If you take on the responsibility of your child's life, and that really means their happiness, and you're not successful every day, it's easy to start blaming yourself and shaming yourself and judging yourself. And your kids are watching all of that going on, and they begin to learn, wow, maybe part of life is about judging yourself harshly and being unsatisfied with the job you're doing. And I don't think that's what parents want to model for their kids. So as we begin to give kids more responsibility for their lives and their emotional health, and we're there to help nurture and foster and guide a little bit, it allows us to be much more compassionate and encouraging with ourselves, which is then good for the children, because when we can give that to ourselves, when we can forgive ourselves, we can forgive our children. When we can admit that we made a mistake and move forward, we can extend that same grace to our kids. So it's a win-win for everybody when we start putting responsibility back where it belongs. My friend Rick Ackerley has a great saying about playing your position. And he talks about it in terms of education. But I think in parenting, it's that same idea. Listen, we all have to play our position. My child's position is to learn how to master their world. And my job is to be there as the support, not the person who maintains responsibility for it. So parents will whip out a parenting strategy. So here's how it goes. You're struggling with your 7-year-old who won't sit quietly at the table. They get up 15 times, they complain about the food, and you've had it. You're at your wit's end. So you call your best friend, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I just read this great book. We tried it with Emily, and it worked. This is what you do." So you get your little notebook out and you're taking notes, like, "Yeah, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. Oh, this is great." Then what do you say? "Okay, good." And you look at your kid and you go, "Listen, buddy, there's a new sheriff in town. I've got a strategy to deal with the fact that you won't sit at the table, and we're going to try it tonight." And the kid's like, "Whatever." So you get your little book out. He starts making mischief. You do what your friend said, but it doesn't work. You're like, "Well, okay, maybe it was the strategy. Maybe my kid's different. Maybe they have blue eyes and her kid has brown eyes. So maybe I need to find it." So you go out and you read a blog post about it and you try that. So our kids keep doing what they're doing, making mischief at the dinner table, and you bring an assortment of band-aids out to try and remedy this problem, and nothing works. And each time you try something and it fails, you question your ability to parent this very small child, which then throws you into a panic because if you can't manage a 7-year-old, how are you going to manage a 15-year-old? And so we start to lose confidence every single time we whip out a quick band-aid to put on what we now consider a very large problem. And what I recommend is that the first thing that happens is we have to shift our mindset. We have to change our perspective. If you're using the same thinking with every strategy, you're always going to end up with a lousy result. So before you go get a new strategy, change your mindset about what you think the problem is. And in that moment, no matter what strategy you try, you're probably going to have more luck with it. Yeah. Yeah. Right. I do too. So instead of the sit down or I'm going to take your plate, if you don't do this, you're not going to watch TV. I'll give you a sticker if you do. You come up with a reasonable solution that's based on the facts. So, what do we want? We want a child who sits down at the table and eats with us. What do we know about people who are done eating? They tend to leave the table. That's a common sense idea. So we say to the kids, "Gee, how do you know when somebody's done eating?" They say, "Well, they get up from the table." And you're like, "Exactly. So from now on, when you get up from the table, that means you're done eating. And so your plate's going to be taken away. If you want to eat, stay at the table. If you're done eating, leave the table." And that because absolutely. But when you're calm and you're thoughtful and you're not threatening your child and you're not trying to bribe your child and it isn't a complicated strategy to manipulate your child, you can actually follow through with a very friendly attitude that says, "Sweetie, you're a choice. Nobody's forcing you to get up from the table. You could stay here and eat, or you could get up and leave. But when you leave, what it means is that you're done. So your plate goes away until the next meal." Now you have a child who's in the position for the first time to ask himself, "Hmm, well, how hungry am I when I go to the table? And how much do I want to eat?" And for the first time, that child is actually engaged in a thinking process about the mealtime and less about the shenanigans of getting up and having mom and dad try and convince him to sit back down. Now, all of that is done and it's very simple. So, in my world with 5 kids, there were hundreds of opportunities for me to use very simple, very common sense strategies to help the kids learn something that I thought would benefit them, but would certainly also benefit me because they were sitting at the table. We could enjoy each other's company and we could take them out for dinner, which I wanted to do. Yeah, they do. I I do recognize, and I gotta tell you, in my experience, children eat if given the opportunity, and food is presented to them in an attractive way, and there isn't a lot of pressure from parents to eat, take one more bite, quit playing with your food, don't drop that on the ground. So instead of creating an environment where children are introduced from very early ages the pleasure of eating together as a family, it becomes a sideshow in which the child is the main attraction. And what? Oh, yeah. Yeah, and part of what I say to parents is, if you wouldn't do it with your best friend, don't do it to your kids, and that's directly from Adler's work, is, the proper way of raising children is the way that we treat each other as adults. So, you extend those same kinds of routines, systems, behaviors, manners, and make it appropriate to the age, but you don't get yourself into these pickles where everything has to be on a train ride, and then you have to juggle, and now you have to sit on the floor in a teepee to eat. It's like, listen, this is where we eat. This is how long we eat. This is how we eat. If you want to do it differently, you can leave the table. And kids are fairly smart. If what they want is to feed their bellies and be with their parents, they oftentimes get with the program because the alternative is a hungry belly and no conversation with mom and dad. So, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it starts as soon as the kids stand up and they have 2 free hands, and the first 2 things out of their mouths are "I do" or, "I help." And we get in their way and say, no, it's too sharp, it's too hot, it's you're too messy, you're too slow. And just as a child's beginning to develop that cooperative nature, we say, no, 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 go sit down, I'll do it for you. And by the time you have a 5, a 6, a 7-year old, you are more maid than you are parent. Now, I, if you want to be the maid, go for it. I didn't want to be the maid. I don't find anything particularly interesting or engaging about that position. It's hard work and it should be a paid position. What I wanted to be was emotionally available to my kids, and if I was micromanaging their lives, if I was waking them up and picking out their clothes and getting them dressed and making their breakfast and cleaning up after them, and I wasn't paying attention to all of the growth and changes that were happening for them emotionally because I was in the minutia of life. So that was the first thing I figured out was I don't wanna be the maid, I wanna be emotionally available. But I also knew that if I wanted to send out high functioning adults into the world, that they were going to need 18 years to practice managing their lives and mastering all of these self skills. And I thought, well, it's much easier to do it with a 2 and a 3-year old because they want to do it than it is to wait on them for 5 or 6 years and then say when they're 7 and 8, listen, bucko, it's time for you to start, chipping in and taking care of more things. And here's why, because it's not that kids are resistant to helping. It's that they've been convinced that they don't have the ability to take care of themselves because a well meaning parent has been making life easy for them. And instead of being appreciative and grateful and, wow, isn't this great? The only thing I have to do is go play, they start to doubt their ability to get themselves dressed and to get up with an alarm clock and to make breakfast without spilling and to remember their backpack. And that seems like not only a disservice to the kids at that age, but a missed opportunity in allowing our children to develop deep and profound confidence in their abilities to manage their own lives and then to contribute to the success of their families. So I came up with a motto: if they can walk, they can work. And from the get-go, my kids were involved in the running of the house and taking care of themselves, and we did it slowly over time so that they weren't overwhelmed. So it's one of the things I talk a lot about in terms of promoting independence and self-reliance is how does a busy family with multiple kids and jobs and outside commitments empower their kids to take on more responsibilities and still get out of the house on time? And believe it or not, there is a way to do it, but we have to kind of slow the process down and make it manageable. I think the leap of faith comes from switching your approach and your mindset. Instead of thinking that if you're not in control of the kids, everything will be chaos, there has to be kind of a disconnecting process where you begin to step back and allow the kids to step more actively into their lives. And that means things are going to be messier because they need time to practice. So it takes a leap of faith to not foster those fears that say we're never going to get out of the house on time. They'll never eat anything healthy. They're never going to go to bed. They'll watch hours and hours of television. They'll beat their sister up. They'll pull the dog. Like we have all these fears that keep us in that kind of micromanaging position. So when we're willing to change our approach, it means that you really have to be willing to take a leap that for a while things will be messy, but they will right themselves, that you will come to that sweet spot, that balance where you're engaged, but you're not over involved. Right. Yeah. I think it's important again to go back to this idea about mindset. So parents often find themselves in the middle of the sibling squabbles. And so the kids now know that if they start to fight, they get their parents. And maybe they wanted their parents 15 minutes ago, but the parents were unavailable. Well, if we start fighting with each other, mom's going to turn the stove off and come out. We might get yelled at, but at least we get mom for a few minutes. So that's one of the reasons kids fight. They also fight because they're bored. They have nothing else to do. So imagine if you're a kid and you see all this activity in your kitchen. People are cooking and they're talking and maybe they're having a glass of wine and there's laughter and you try and get in and somebody goes, no, 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 just go play. We'll call you when dinner's ready. You're like, well, now wait a minute. There's a lot of action going on in there. Like, I want to be over there with you guys. And every time you try and find a place in that activity, you're scooted out. Well, when you get bored and you're not invited to the party, it's easy to pick a fight with your sibling because at least then the party moves towards you. So boredom is a big part of sibling rivalry. And I think the last piece is we don't teach kids how to be in relationship with people who have different personalities than them, that have a different temperament, who have a different rhythm. Instead, what we say to kids is don't fight, don't yell, don't hit, but we don't teach them the art of getting along with people that are not exactly like you. So one of the things we help parents do is figure out if these were not your kids, but these were two people that had to coexist who looked at the world in very different ways, how would you help them do that? And suddenly they have 6 ideas on what they would do. And then we say, good, now go and try that with your kids and see what happens. And sure enough, the squabbles start to diminish. The kids begin to enjoy each other in a way they hadn't before. They're also being invited now to be more uh, uh, active in the family. And those few things are enough to minimize the sibling rivalry by 50, 60, 70%. So I think there are really simple solutions to that, but we oftentimes overlook them. Yeah. Yeah, I tell you, it's tough being a parent right now. Truthfully, I'm glad my kids are grown, but that means now grandkids will be coming, and so I'll be back in the trenches trying to figure out how to help out there. Um, so technology is here to stay, and part of the problem is we have not figured out how we're going to deal with it as the adults. And I liken it to driving a car. If you had a 9-year-old who said to you, "Listen, I can reach the pedals and I can see over the steering wheel, so I want to drive," there's not one person, one adult who would go, "Wow, I should consider that." You'd say, "Listen, this is the way it happens. You got to be 16, you got to fulfill these requirements, you got to pass a test, then you drive." There's no discussion. But with technology, we give kids technology and then wonder if we did it the right way. So it's a learning curve right now. I think within the next few years, we're going to figure out how to allow kids to be part of the digital age, but also limit their access to a global world at the touch of a key. So I think we're getting there. I think there's this idea that kids are more at risk outside of our homes than they really are. Um, and so we try and minimize their exposure to what we think of as risks. And you can look at a playground now where nobody's allowed to jump or swing or any number of things. I'm not sure that children are more fragile than they were when we were growing up. I don't suspect that they're clumsier than we were. I suspect there's always going to be a part of the population, a percentage of kids who end up in the emergency room with a broken arm, whether there are plastic playgrounds or wooden ones or just trees in the background. So I think we're not accessing common sense some of the time. And in an attempt to keep kids safe, we've gone over the edge. In terms of safety from predators, a good friend of mine and someone I work with, Gavin DeBecker, who wrote The Gift of Fear and Protecting the Gift, makes a very strong case that it isn't the outside world that the kids need protecting from. It's education, how to trust their instincts and intuition, and how to communicate with their parents in an honest way. And for parents to listen to kids when they come to them with a fear about an uncle who is being too friendly, or Johnny's big brother who wants to get me in the room alone, and to take those concerns seriously. I think that the conversation is becoming a little bit more balanced than it was even 10 years ago. And it is my great hope that it continues to become more balanced, and that parents move a little bit closer to Lenore Skenazy's kind of, you know, uh, let them get dirty and let them fall and let them go a little bit further than you want them to go, because they can handle it uh, if you teach and you educate. So, yeah. Yes, I think it's the same as teaching kids about finances starting in the second grade, because money's such an integral part of our lives as adults, and nobody teaches kids about finance. It's the same with parenting. But here's what I know as a parent educator: every person who finds themselves pregnant for the first time thinks they will do it different. And that's why you have kids, is because you can look around at the chaos and think, but I'm going to be different and my relationship will be different. It's usually by the time the personality emerges in the child at about 2 that my phone starts ringing, and those same parents who said I don't need this say, I have no idea who's in the house with me anymore. They went from a lovely 1-year-old to an unbearable 2-year-old. So now what do I do? So, do I think there's a place for foundational pieces of psychology about interactions and relationships and fostering independence? Absolutely. Do I think that information would help as those kids grew into adults that were going to be parents? Absolutely. I just don't think it's an important part of any educational model curriculum right now, which is, unfortunate. So, yeah. Mhm. I think the unique aspect of the second book is this idea that parents have that a parent educator or someone who writes about parenting or says that they're an expert somehow has some magical power that they don't, which is complete nonsense. So the book was really about, listen, when I work with parents on a client, on a coaching level, I'm going to tell you everything I do and then you can do it and you won't need to hire me. That was really what my goal was, is if you knew the questions to ask that I ask you, you would need to hire me. And that I hope that every parent comes to the point where they realize that they're the real experts in their children's lives. So I map out how I work with the client and what questions I ask, and then how those questions lead a client to solutions that work for them. And then I provide stories on how different parents came up with, use those questions. But more importantly, it's about helping parents understand that parenting is not about what happens when your kids are living at home between the ages of 0 and 18. Your job, our job, is to reconcile the fact that we are living with toddlers, but we are raising adults. And that means we have got to change the way in which we spend our time with children. Because right now, what we're looking for is compliance and control. And what we want to be focused on is raising children who are engaged, thoughtful, curious, cooperative, responsible, and resourceful. And that is not happening if the only thing you're worried about is children who are polite and have manners and eat what you put in front of them and never talk back. So, a lot of the work right now that I'm doing is about helping parents reconcile that the meltdown their 4-year-old is having, it's important that they not only deal with that moment, but they think about the impact this moment will have on their future 24-year-old. And that for me is really exciting work right now. Thank you. Thanks. It was a pleasure. Mm. I'll trust you. Do whatever you want to do. Yeah. 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 Thank you. Nice. Good. I am. I'm going to go spend 5 months in Fiji from May to September, and then I'll relocate to the Petaluma area in October. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Thank you, sir. Have have a great day. You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, bye.